Hello and welcome. You're with the Economic Times and I'm Vinod Mahanta. It's my pleasure to welcome all of you on the conversation on a subject that is fundamentally altering the way businesses function. Today, Mahindra Logistics presents the Economic Times Supply Chain Dialogue, and we are going to be discussing emerging opportunities due to supply chain disruption. From March 2020, when shelves were being emptied, to later when global supply chains needed to scramble to adjust to the effects of the pandemic, the supply chain operations have been under immense pressure. Every business now feels the need to create a future-ready supply chain. I remember talking to CEOs during April 2020, when most were worried about the demand shock, but the real shock was to come from the supply side. The pandemic has really brought to the fore the fact that supply chain is a mission critical growth driver and engine for businesses and not just a must have cost center. Today, as businesses grapple with multiple challenges, there are port congestions, there are rising commodity prices, logistics disruptions, and shifting consumer behavior. Managing the supply chain is currently one of the most complex roles in an organization. And I don't think since 1917, since the oil shock of 1970s, the boardrooms have discussed supply chain that much. If you are a professional working in the supply chain industry, it is time to listen to an august set of panelists that we have assembled today. These are people who have seen it all, people who have done it all, people from multinationals, people from Indian multinationals, people from startups. It's a great panel today. I hope we can all learn from each other. I have with us Mr. Ajay Lal, Vice President, Operations, Commercial Vehicle Business Unit, Tata Motors, Mr. Javed Ahmed, Senior Vice President, Global Supply Chain International Region, Schneider Electric, Mr. Piyush Agarwal, Head Supply Chain, Pepperfry, Mr. Gajanan Lahane, Integrated Supply Chain Head, Honeywell Process Solutions, Mr. Saurabh Jain, Partner Supply Chain Transformation, PwC, and Mr. Sushil Rathi, CEO, MLL Transportation and Procurement, and CEO, Lords Freight. Gentlemen, welcome to the discussion and thanks for taking out some time to join us today. Before I initiate the discussion, house rule, basically, whoever wants to ask a question, there is a tab. You can post the question. I will put it forward to the panelists. Now it's time to request Mr. Saurabh Jain of PwC to present some of the key issues that industry must address to achieve supply chain resilience. Over to you, Saurabh.
Thank you. I'll just share my screen and I'll be using a set of slides to talk about some perspectives on emerging opportunities due to supply chain disruptions. Friends, we all know, what all of us as supply chain professionals or even CXOs have gone through over the last, I would say, almost 3 years now. There have been a number of challenges. I think some of the challenges were also made in the opening remarks. I think we all are well aware of. Having said that, what we definitely see and some perspective I want to share is that, there is one part of disruptions which has happened and which surely was a big one this time. On top of that, there is also that changing customer behaviors, expectations, which are also challenging all of us, and people who, we all run our supply chains in our respective organizations. So there is an all-round challenge. It was also mentioned that, commodity prices have gone up. We all know about the bottlenecks in our global supply chains, whether it's in getting containers on time or looking at increase in logistics costs, whether it's domestic transportation or international. So there are n number of challenges that we see all around us. The customer behavior bit, absolutely, I must mention that, even for a lot of my clients and the companies that I work for, we see that, every company is now trying to cater to a very different customer expectation. And across industries, we see all of us individuals as well, trying to explore multiple channels and then really looking to buy any product, whether it's a consumer product or anything else. And we all want a seamless experience, from that perspective, from whichever company product we are looking to buy. We want transparency as a customer, right? I mean, we want to know real-time basis, where's my order, when I'm going to get it, is it the lowest price or not? We all like to do those comparisons, at the click of a button. Sustainability, I think one of the very important agenda points that I see emerging, and a challenge, of course, as well for supply chain professionals is, and it's actually a boardroom agenda now and the CEO agenda around sustainability. There is a concern around product reliability, product origin, quality, the overall sustainability, carbon footprint, and many of those aspects, plastics, things like that. So that's another additional concern and a challenge and a pressure point for supply chain professionals. Disruption or no disruption. As a customer, we want what we need, right? We want everything at the click of a button, whether there is a lockdown in a place or people not available to service, etc. But from an organization or a brand, we want that service. And this could be a local level issue, or it could be actually a larger China, US, geopolitical equations changing, weather issues, and even the pandemic kind of issues, right? We all want everything, at the right time and in the right place. Digital lifestyle, I think again an important part, and this is again an expectation as well as an enabler, where we see the proliferation of a lot of these interactive models, you leveraging digital technologies, and therefore there is a lot more free flow of information and feedback. Even customers also give feedback very, very quickly on a Twitter or on a Facebook or any of the social media platforms like that, etc. And therefore, again, any lacuna in any of the supply chains, really gets highlighted very, very quickly. So what are we really talking about here? In some perspective that I'm just looking to share, that there are heightened customer expectations. There are digital marketplaces, and which is all really putting a pressure on companies to transform their supply chain. And it's not just my own supply chain in the organization; it's actually the overall ecosystem beyond my supply chain. My partner supply chain, the extended tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 supply chain, where the overall responsibility really lies with the principal, but then we need to engage with our ecosystem. So clearly on the right hand side that you see on this slide is very quickly, the perspective that we firmly believe in is that tomorrow's supply chains will be connected and self-orchestrated ecosystems. In simple terms, what that means is our supply chains would be connected across, and it's not within my value chain, but extended value chains. They need to be connected with my partners as well. They will not only be, we're not talking about automation alone, that we have a few systems and things that automated, but autonomous supply chains, where supply chains should be able to run on their own without, and very limited human intervention may be required. And number 3, optimization. Any optimized choices, there would be a number of decision points, and some of those decision points to a good extent can also be made autonomously in real time and across functions. Here, all functions we are talking about, whether you see the circle diagram here, right from customer to manufacturing to my suppliers and my distribution network. This is the way we see a connected and autonomous supply chain ecosystem. A few points, sorry for a busy slide here, but then, I think 5 key capabilities that I must like to, mention to all of you. When I say sustainability, it is actually, from a transparency and a visibility standpoint. We all want visibility, we all want transparency in our supply chains. And this will also act as a catalyst for sustainability. Whether we build a digital twin to do simulation, whether we want to map out the carbon emissions and impact on the larger ecosystem and the environment, unless you have visibility and transparency in your supply chain, you can't even take up the sustainability agenda that is so very critical for boardrooms these days. Second is around closed loop and integrated planning. I'm sure many of you who are supply chain professionals or coming in from different organizations, we all talk about SNOP, integrated planning, those kind of things. I think they have been happening, but what we are talking about now is a next level planning, which is a synchronized real time with execution also as part of a closed loop, and which also seamlessly integrates with my partners, whether it's a tier 1, tier 2 we want to talk about, and a continuous optimization. And here again, a lot of AI based technologies we can build in. We can do demand sensing, which is more near term demand forecast and changes that we can take care of. And our execution systems also respond very quickly to those near-term changes. Third is around supply chain resilience. I think pretty much, last year we all spoke about it big time. Every organization looked to identify early warning signals, build in more, you can say redundancy in their supply chains, and being able to really have that mitigation set of strategies built in, etc. I think there's lots that has happened, but I'm sure there's more to be done. Smart logistics flows, a very important aspect. I think we all know about global supply chains, container issues, the Suez Canal issue, the domestic freight issues. I think a lot of all that is known, well known. Again, how do you really use data and analytics to, make your logistics flow smarter? And there are several use cases, one could look at to enable this. And of course, number of technology platforms which are available now coming in even from our startup ecosystem in India. And lastly is the dynamic segmentation. Very clearly, one size won't fit all. Any organization you might be in, you will have to look at dynamic supply chain across different channels. You might be catering to a B2B channel, or you might be having a modern trade. You might be catering to a general trade, whichever channels that you cater to. you need to be able to really do segmentation in a very, very dynamic manner and cater to the needs which continue to change, as well as continue to optimize your cost to serve for different channels. I'll not spend much time on this, but just in nutshell on this slide is 5 capabilities that I spoke about on the last slide. I think there are 4 aspects that you have to really look at. Number 1, you see is visibility. Number 2 is insights. 3 is integration, and 4 is execution. And there are set of steps and opportunities which are there available to all of us to leverage now. The costs have come down. There are very, very good startup ecosystem and startups, which are out there, willing to work on with you. I know a lot of use cases that I've been working on around blockchain, using blockchain in a pharma supply chain to enable a very different degree of transparency across that. And we are working with startups for some of that. And when you see this slide, these 4 aspects, and if you start focusing on some of your initiatives and use cases, you can actually move from a digital novice, which is really a basic level, to become a digital champion in whichever function, department, supply chain, area you want to really focus on. Pick up few use cases, and you can easily drive initiatives, currently. And as I said, the cost is not really a challenge anymore. Lastly, this is my last slide for today. Again, when I'm talking about a lot of this, there are aspects around connected and autonomous supply chain ecosystem. There is cognitive automation tools which are available now, which I believe, and as PwC, we believe that can become a significant value contributor in times to come. And doing all of these initiatives and the use cases that I mentioned briefly on the previous one, they make a lot of economic sense and business sense currently. The whole aspect of really building a huge amount of business case and approvals, I think organizations are willing to now really try and fail and try again. So each of these aspects that you see, whether on sustainability, planning, building more resilience, logistics flows, and segmentation, I think you can easily identify implications on a revenue uplift, cost optimization or a cost reduction, working capital improvement, improving your asset utilization or spreading your assets faster and better, and of course, bringing down your overall supply chain risk, etc. So my recommendation to each and everyone would be that, it's really the time for supply chain professionals. There's lots and lots of opportunities available. I think we are at the forefront in across all organizations and all sectors. And I think we can definitely try a lot of new, I would say capabilities that we can build into our organizations to enhance the overall supply chain resilience and manage some of these disruptions much better. So that's where I would stop, and thank you very much. Look forward to any questions later on as we go through the discussion.
Okay, let me try and take it over, since we do seem to be having some problems with Vinod being able to connect. I must mention here, Vinod is in fantastic Shimla. He's enjoying the mild snowfall that's been happening. So maybe he's enjoying a bit as well. So he'll come in. Maybe we should give him some time for us to join. My name is Ashutosh Sinha, and just like Vinod, I also work with Economic Times. I'm a senior editor, just like Vinod, for the organization. I love the way, Saurabh, you mentioned the kind of a roadmap that you mentioned about digital novice to being a digital champion. And Ms. Lal, if you can, how easy is it? It sounds very simple, sounds very, catchy to say such a thing. How easy, as you break down into little segments, is this for organizations and the opportunities that are emerging?
Yeah, good afternoon, Ashutosh. And first of all, wishing you very, very speedy recovery. We all know that you have a little bit of that infection now. All the best to you.
Thank you.
So good afternoon, all my esteemed co-panelists and the people who are listening to us. So upfront, first of all, I'm a digital novice, Ashutosh. So we'll try and answer your question in a more novice way. But before we get into that, just building on what Saurabh just mentioned, I think for the supply chain colleagues on the call, while many things could have changed with COVID, post-COVID, current COVID, but the expectation from the supply chain colleagues have not changed. They still have to deliver in a very agile manner, in a very flexible manner, so that they reach their goods to the customer at the right time, right? Despite all the difficulties that we talked about. Therefore, when we talk about the resilience in the current context, and now that we have experienced it for some time now in all our companies, I think one of the things that we have learned is that it also calls for a little bit of mindset change. And what do I mean by that? Sometimes now we need not, or we cannot continue to focus on, let's say, short-term maximization of efficiencies, but also at long-term sustained value creation or value chain. And what do I mean by that? See, in an earlier paradigm, while efficiency was one of the, let's say, supreme KPI for the supply chain folks, now I think they will have to think a little bit differently, in the sense that how do they create resilience, and how do they create that? They obviously will have to build buffers. They have to think of inventory in a different way. They have to think of strategic sourcing in a different way. And therefore, some of the way that we used to think earlier used to give us a lot of efficiency that may get compromised in the short term. But what it will build is a long-term resilience, and therefore our capability to deliver even under these black swan events or these extreme events or under these disruptions. And digital is one of the wonderful ways which has been a great enabler. I think fortunately, most of us on the call, as well as my own company, we are undertaking this industry 4.0 journey, sometime back, and it came in really, really handy. And now, just to give you an example, we have activated something called connected manufacturing, which means that, since I am from automobile, like I can only talk about automobiles. So as you know, the final vehicles rolls out on an assembly line. And what we have been able to do now is connect our assembly line flows to, the manufacturing sequence of the assembly line, to the manufacturing sequence of aggregate manufacturing shops, and to that also to our major critical vendors. And therefore, what has actually happened is that all of us are able to transparently look at the production sequence, and therefore the part requirement, the aggregate requirement, the part requirement for the aggregates, and therefore everybody is aligned. And this transparency is actually also helping the entire supply chain prepare themselves on time. Just to give you a simple example, some of our vehicles, their application, they are also application mounted on that. Let's say we call them a fully built vehicle. Let's say tipper body is mounted on a bare chassis truck. So as I drop that chassis on a line, and as I scan the number, we have, let's say, 20 bodybuilders in our ecosystem. The bodybuilder to which this vehicle will go, he comes to know of it, that this chassis number is going to come to me. And the lead time is such that by the time it reaches this bodybuilder, it will take 4 to 5 days. And therefore he gets this time to plan his resources, to plan his material, to optimally be ready. And not only it reduces the lead time, he's ready, he's far more efficient. And therefore, and as Tata Motors also, we come to know when the vehicle reaches there, how much time does it take to really convert that into a fully built application and send it back to us. So, this is one simple way on how digital has really helped in this situation. Nobody's talking to anybody, no more frantic phone calls. The visibility is absolutely, online, and everybody is able to see on how things are happening. And this has come as a great enabler to the supply chain folks. So Ashutosh, I don't know whether I've really answered your question.
No, you have. And I like to open the discussion to get other thoughts from various panelists on basically how they were able to deal with the sudden shock, and also build in strategies which could help you, or beat competition, or compete in the marketplace in a better way. It is a great panel today. We have people from different industries, different kinds of companies. If we can have Javed, you come in and talk about your experience, and then we can open up to the other panelists as well.
Thank you, Vinod. Are you able to hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, so thank you, Vinod. So, we have been working on digitization and end-to-end supply chain. So I will tell you a little bit about our business. So our supply chain is global, but we are regionally managed. So we have 4 regions worldwide. You have US, North America, you have Europe, you have China, and then you have international. So I represent the international region, which is basically spreading over East Asia, Japan, Pacific, India, Middle East, Africa, and South America. So our supply chain is globally managed. So basically, we have many businesses, but the supply chain function manages the supply chain for all the different businesses that are there in Schneider Electric. So this is a very unique setup. You won't see a setup like this in many companies. And since our factories are global in nature, we are not only catering to that particular region, we are also catering to customers all over the world. And this requires an end-to-end orchestration of the supply chain, right from the customer all the way down to the supplier. So we have been working on this journey of digitization, and we have connected all the different elements of the supply chain digitally. And this is helping us in orchestrating all this. So we had started this journey, Industry 4.0, much before the COVID. But the COVID came as an enabler where we accelerated a lot of things which we would have probably taken more time to do, and we did it in a much shorter period of time. So, I mean, just to let you know, I mean, a customer order is there, and immediately it's there on the Schneider. We have a web portal through which all our distributors, etc., place the order. And then it automatically, that demand is visible to everybody. It's transmitted down to the factory that it needs to be transmitted to. The factory can see it immediately. They can plan, launch it onto the shop floor. Based on that order, we can book containers in advance. Now, as you mentioned in your opening session, that container shortages have been there. So earlier, it was never a problem. You just call up the container company and they would deliver whatever containers you would need. So, but now forecasting of containers became important. So we have to give a 4 weeks forecast in advance to make sure that the container would be available for us. Now, this is something we had never seen happen in the industry. So this was a big change. And then also working with all the suppliers, we have a lot of electronics content in our products. So a lot of electronic shortages, engaging with the suppliers, and also working at the C level, to make sure that all these suppliers understand our demand, getting into their supply chain, how they produce, what are their lead times, etc., putting the right safety stocks. I mean, giving long-term purchase orders, which we never used to do before. As Mr. Joy said, that we were working on short intervals. Now we have given agreements going out 18 months, 20 months to build a lot of resilience. So we are short of supply. A lot of cost inflation factors, controlling the air freight, optimizing containers, optimizing routes, trying to avoid spot buys of containers, etc., to keep the supply chain efficient. So a lot of challenges we have faced, and I'm very happy to say that we have dealt with them adequately and we were able to meet the customer demand. One good advantage that we have in our supply chain is all our supply chain is end-to-end orchestrated, and several of our products we make in multiple factories. So let's say if a particular factory is having a shortage and there was capacity available in another factory where we could immediately transfer the demand over to that factory. We have multiple suppliers, who supply common parts all over the globe. Okay, the prices might not be the same, but in case some supplier was stressed, we could order parts from another supplier. So all these things we were able to orchestrate because we have an end-to-end connected digital supply chain. We would have not been able to do and serve the customer better if we didn't have those capabilities and we were not agile and our people were not trained. We had very harsh lockdowns in several parts of the world, in Vietnam and India and Malaysia. People were working from home. And I'm very happy to say that our operations went seamlessly because of this digital connect and because of this end-to-end orchestration, where we were able to anticipate.
Did you get any sleep?
Actually, definitely the first wave was very difficult because it's something we had not experienced before. The government has imposed a very, very harsh lockdown in 2020. So the first thing was to go and apply for permission for the government to restart. That was a process by itself. And we were able to convince the government authorities that we have all the right safety procedures in place, and they gave us the permission. They were very helpful, very accommodating. They looked at our procedures, our safety protocols, and they allowed us to restart the factories. So within 3-4 days of announcing the harsh lockdowns, we were able to get back into operation, So, I mean, the first phase was very difficult because it was something we had not done before, but I think we did okay. But the second phase and all, the lockdown was less harsh. And I think we had gained from experience and we were better prepared, in wave two. Even though the mortality rates and it was much more severe, in wave two compared to wave one.
Sure. That was a multinational view. For a startup, Piyush, how difficult was it for you to first deal with the demand shock and then have an extended and have conversations with your supply chain across India and get them up to speed of what business needed at that point of time?
Yeah. Good afternoon, Vinod. So definitely it was very hard for most of the companies, and we were also in the same queue. But one thing I would like to add that in terms of resilience, we had an advantage, and that's a significant advantage we have, that we own our supply. So Pepperfry is a company. When we say we own our supply chain, so that means all the warehouses and even the fleet is our own. So that gives a significant advantage to us, that we are not so much dependent on the outside world. And whenever the government imposed a lockdown, definitely we couldn't do much. But the day the lockdown was lifted, all the 400 trucks for us were waiting to be dispatched to the customers. So that was quite a good advantage which we had, and it was definitely not planned in that way. But now we realize the importance of that if we, like, being a asset light company is a thing, but even if things like owning your own fleet, carrying good amount of inventory, these are not bad things, so to say. This has helped us to sail through the pandemic, and there is definitely a scope to evaluate that where to bring the efficiencies from. So if we talk about our strengths, so it comes from that we own our supply chain, we understand furniture, and we can give the customer experience in the way that no other company can give. So that is something which we have built and we are very proud of. So definitely it was difficult to answer your question, but we had an advantage over our competitors.
Yeah, that word sleep caught my attention because everyone knew only one word. Sleepless was the word, I thought, more than sleep during those times. Gajanan, give us a sense of what that sleeplessness taught you or taught the company in terms of the opportunities that emerged and how you managed to sharpen your skills for that.
Yeah, so definitely, I think the experience was similar, Ashutosh, what our panelists have seen. But it also gave an opportunity, right? And I can quote an example in the mid of a pandemic. I think it was April first week or second week after the lockdown was announced. And we decided we wanted to put a new manufacturing line for N95 mask. And that was a great example of how the company or the supply chain resilience came together. And we could set up a line within 12, 14 weeks. And we did it, I think, with a lot of sleepless nights, like you said, but I think we could do it in 14 weeks. So yeah, so there were certain challenges, but I think there were certain opportunities also. And that is a great example, I'll say. And the other thing would like to add to what Javed and Ajoy said, yeah, the Internet of Things and digitization was there, but it sort of speeded up or caught up more in this pandemic times. And you can see in India, when we always used to talk about the labor cost is much competitive than our international peers, we also started talking about robotics, making automation. And I think we have done a lot of those things in the last 2 years. And the third thing is, of course, the data, right? When everybody is working remotely, because supply chain is more of a collaborative work, right? And everybody working from home, you have plants globally, they are doing the similar products, you want to move demands because of the lockdown, because of the shortages. So this data-driven decision-making, I think in digitization, it helped us a lot. Because our journey started somewhere 4 years back as a company, and we could see that those efforts, which we have put in 19 and 20 to accelerate all this data, database decision-making in supply chain has helped us.
Sure. It's very obvious that a lot of companies went through a ringer during the last 2 years, and that's one, and that's the company. But as for a logistics provider for a companies, I'm sure there would have been a lot of problems. So, Mr. Rathi, if you can come in and you can talk about how difficult was it for you to work with such an uncertain situation in multiple fronts.
Yeah, thank you, Vinod. Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So thank you very much. See, the biggest challenge for us during the phase 1 and phase 2 of COVID was at this juncture, if you think through, the responsibility at our level was to ensure the safety of not only our employees, but the goods which were entrusted to us by our customers. And when you are the safekeeper of somebody else's material, the responsibility is high and the pressure is even higher. So during the April-May 2020, when suddenly lockdowns were announced, we had the situation where the trucks were on the roads with the finished goods lying inside the trucks. And we had to ensure that how do we make sure that these trucks can reach safely as soon as the lockdowns are lifted, and how do we keep morale high of the drivers during that period, and making sure that they have their daily food and other things available to them was a mammoth task. But having said that, the biggest change which we saw post the phase 1 and phase 2 is, as the supply chains were becoming more global, it was also becoming more fragile. And this required that for having a right supply chain to operate, you require the collaboration with your partners to transform from plan and execute to kind of sense and respond in a way to operate. So that is something which I feel was one of the major change which we witnessed, because it's not about only the visibility into events concerning supply chain, but it is also the how do you respond and adjust. And those were the very characteristics that make the resilient supply chain. So that is something I think got into the focus, and everybody started talking about how do we make the supply chain more resilient. So while the technology helped in terms of the information flow smoothly, quickly, or planning aspect, but the more important thing was people had to evaluate or reevaluate or reorganize their entire network, from where to source, how to source, how much to keep. Now we heard Mr. Lal about the automotive industry. One of the foremost in the industry which has evolved in the supply chain was the JIT-JIS kind of supplies, just in time, just in sequence kind of thing. Automotive industries have really perfected it. Companies like Mahindra, Tata, Maruti, etc. have done very well on that front. But during this time, you could not run with very thin inventory. You had to replan, you had to readjust to the new normal and see what can be done so that disruption can be avoided. You don't want your lines to go dry and supplies to suddenly become dry. So those are the aspects which came into play at this juncture. And I think every company started rethinking and replanning their entire supply chain strategies.
Sure. So let me come to Mr. Lal now. Mr. Lal, one of the things that also happened, and not just during COVID, a little bit before actually, but that the opportunities have only multiplied as policy-wise, there have been trade agreements that are being pushed with specific countries and regions. How is that opening up newer opportunities for companies? And of course, in the light of the current situation.
So that is quite right. I think the newer alliances are getting formed, and everybody wants to be not, in a manner of speaking, be in the situation that we went through in phase one and phase two. So several realignments are happening across the supply chain. There are people, every company is looking at not being over dependent on one geography or one company. So all these things are going to help. For example, one of the shortages that you must have heard during this COVID period is semiconductor shortage or chip shortage,
Mhm.
right? Which has impacted all of us in the automobile very significantly. And why only automobile? I think even consumer electronics and others have got equally impacted. So therefore, you will see a lot of alliances now happening with the semiconductor companies and the fab companies which actually do the casting for those fabrications, and the OEMs who, in a manner of speaking, build ECUs on that, and then they supply it back to the OEMs of vehicles. So what has happened during this time? You're talking about a collaboration. So engineering teams of the OEM companies and the engineering teams of these semiconductor manufacturers and the ECUs, electronic control units, they got together and they actually optimized on the number of chips that should get into one ECU to be able to deliver the same function, but kind of optimizing the number of chips getting into that. How do you get into that kind of a chip which is more available, and let's say which has no conflict with 5G kind of usage? And therefore all these design changes took place, and collaboratively this got developed, got tested, and then met the testing criteria and the deliveries happened. And I think these are some of the ways in which actually the companies and, let's say, countries also got involved and resolved these issues.
Okay. Vinod, go ahead, please.
Yeah. So one of the things that that happened during the last 2 years was that the business continuity plans failed a lot of times. They were telling us that, okay, we had planned for 3 or 2 factories being shut, but who had planned for a nationwide lockdown? So one of the things that companies did was basically move to end-to-end technology. Basically, there was a great push within the companies to create an end-to-end tech-led supply chain led by analytics and driven by hardcore technology. How difficult was this a shift to make in the last 2 years, and how costly was it? If you can start with Ajay again, and then Javed can come in.
Obviously, this was costlier, but that was a short-term cost. I think the long-term resilience, as I was mentioning initially also, will need some of these costs, and in the long term, they will pay off. And therefore, these are some of the necessary steps that need to be taken. That is one of the major learning from this pandemic. And we have gone ahead and done that. Investing in such kind of things, rethinking our inventory management models, and then leveraging digital on how do we all get connected transparently online, so that all of us share the same inputs to decide our actions.
Sure. Javed can come in.
Yeah, so Vinod, we have put in a lot of efforts on resilience. And what I will do is I will go step by step how we have orchestrated this resilience. So first time, one is the tactical aspect and then is the strategic aspect. So from a tactical aspect, as I told you in round one, there was a very severe lockdown in India. So one thing that we did was we went to the governments, we prepared the safety protocols, we showed them, and we got all our factories running within 3 or 4 days after the lockdown. So this was a very, very important step in the part of resilience. The second step is, we don't make our own components. All our components are done by our suppliers. So we asked the suppliers to use the same methodology, approach their local governments, and we also helped some suppliers because we have big suppliers, we have small suppliers. Some suppliers are more capable than others. So we helped our suppliers also to get started, right? So this is basically to get the ecosystem, which had come as a sudden crash to get reactivated and get going again. So, I mean, this took almost 10, 12 days, I mean, for it to get up to, I mean, a decent performance level of like 40, 50%, And then, a lot of people were so scared they didn't want to come back to work. So we also came up with some benefits, etc. We showed them our safety protocols, basically to give them the confidence that they will be safe, and also showed it in practice. And we also gave some extra money and all to motivate them, insurance, etc., to motivate them to come back to work. I mean, just to let you know, we hired thousands of people because almost 30, 40% of our workforce was not able to come back to work because some of them had gone to their native places, etc., right? So this is how we got the supply chain that had come to a grinding halt to get reactivated again and get into the motion. So this is the first aspect. Now, the second aspect is, now let's come down to the order orchestration, In the order orchestration, as you know, we have surge capacities, which we had put in place before, and we were able to leverage those surge capacities to basically help us in catching up fast to the demand. Let's say if our capacities were a lot higher than what our average demand was, and those surge capacities helped us in meeting the customer demand to accommodate for this 15, 20 days slow period. So that was from the tactical side of things. And then also, as Mr. Lal said, that we have a lot of electronics in our products. So basically, looking at alternate parts, looking at which parts we can, having a war room, getting alternates qualified. I mean, we have paid a lot of premium prices, spot buys from different places. I mean, just to let you know, I've gone to the extent of paying $80 for a $1 part, I mean, so this was the type of premiums and all we have paid for certain customers, to keep our show running and to keep our customers satisfied. So basically, spot buys, alternate qualification of parts, C-level meetings, I mean, a lot of these electronic suppliers, they're very big suppliers. So bringing the level of engagement at a strategic level, where our head of worldwide procurement and also our CEO having meetings with the CEOs of the likes of Onsemi, TI, ST Micro, those type of people to get their attention and get their engagement with us. Also giving long-term POs. I mean, typically the lead times were like 100 days, 120 days, whatever. Now we are giving POs out for 18 months, 20 months. In some cases, reserving capacities for 2 years, to build in that level of resilience. And also having very active management on all the shortages, etc. Now also rebalancing the raw material on a worldwide basis, because a lot of the raw material is similar. We also had a plastics crisis because certain plastics, specialty plastics were in short supply. Basically seeing, let's say if a plastic is available in Europe in excess or plastics available in India in excess, alternate qualification of plastics. So a lot of those kind of war room activities, that has helped to keep the supply chain running and the resilience. And then is the end-to-end orchestration of all this information. One thing is to make the product available for the customer to serve them. And certain times our lead times, our quoted lead times are, let's say 2 days, right, for a product. Now, certain products are in shortages where our lead time has gone up to like 60 days, 70 days, 80 days, 90 days, right? So giving them accurate information, I mean, that's the least we can do for our customers, is to give them the accurate information. Okay, sir, we'll not be able to supply you now, but this is when we will supply you, and sticking to it. So this becomes very, very important for customers, So orchestrating that, making sure we give a very good, accurate, reliable information to the customer. So, and also engaging very deeply with the customers, understanding their needs and trying to fulfill them to the best possible. Like, let's say product A, both customers might have an order, but it might not be so urgent for customer B as it might be very urgent for customer A, the business impact standpoint. So having that deep engagement, I mean, it's not one thing, it's a whole variety of things.
Got it. Okay, so the other thing also I'd like to raise is the issue of, something that's on the CEO's agenda as well. While all this has been unraveling, the challenges have been unraveling, sustainability has been on the CEO agenda and again accelerated during the pandemic. So, Gajanan, if I can come to you, making the supply chain an integral part of managing the carbon footprint for the organization, that has also been on his agenda. How are you guys dealing with it? How is it unraveling for you in terms of the opportunities? And then, of course, we come to the others on the topic as well.
Yeah, so definitely, I think going green has been a bigger initiative in last 2 years, and I think we have been committed as a company for being sustainable growth and sustainable carbon neutral commitment, right? If you look at our factories, I can give an example. We have a facility in Pune, a manufacturing facility. So we have gone for a solar energy. So our 30-35% consumption is solar. And what we are doing is we are not keeping it to our premises, right? So the pandemic has surely done one thing, is it has washed away the borders between suppliers and the OEM manufacturers, right? So they have become more partners. So we are trying to go to our suppliers or next level suppliers and share this common vision of going green, right? And if you look at our products, what we offer to our customers, we are not just a company which has its own supply chain, but we offer a lot of products which help customer to do a safe operation or a greener operation. So in terms of, like, if you look at our portfolios on the Honeywell Process Solution side, the process management and all for the process or chemical companies, it's a bigger portfolio for safety and sustainability. So we have, I think, seen a good pickup on those aspects, and we continue to drive our initiatives, not only within our four walls of factory, but beyond our four walls with customers as well as our partners. Yeah.
Vinod, if you can move ahead. Yeah.
So one of the things that I wanted to ask Mr. Rathi and Saurabh is, how did the client question change during this pandemic?
Sorry?
One, from the consultant's point of view, how the client, hello, can you hear me?
No, we
Can
couldn't
you
hear you.
So the question for Mr. Rathi and Saurabh, same question, but slightly different angles. For you, Mr. Rathi, the question was, how did the client briefs change? What were the different kind of demands that clients made during the last 2 years? And Saurabh, the question for you is basically, how did the client's briefs change for you? What are the questions they're asking you now in terms of supply chain? If Mr. Rathi, you could go first, please.
Sure, Vinod. So definitely what has happened is, because of these changes, and especially because of the pandemic also, even the customer preferences have changed. And that has also put pressure on the supply chain partners to evolve and try and meet those customers' new requirements at a much faster pace. And but the one of the thing which is very, very important, I think, is, and which we discuss always with our customer, is to look at the supply chain need in a holistic manner. We can't do a piecemeal job or in silos to understand if we want to really make the supply chain resilient or even optimal. For both the things, what we require is looking at a completely holistic manner. And the biggest thing or the change which we are trying to drive along with our customers is the collaborative exchanges, because the collaborative exchanges will enhance the resilience by reducing the uncertainty about the state of supply chain. And there are few pillars which are very, very important from my experience, if I can share that. One, of course, is the trust. And the trust I define by the degree to which supply chain partners have the intention and ability to work together for the good of chain. Because they need to, really have that trust between the partners to, make that happen. Commitment. If you don't if you're not committed towards the end goal, then again you will be doing a suboptimal work. The synchronization, and this is where even the synchronization along with the information sharing, where the IT or the digitization will help a lot. But a larger factor is the incentive alignment. There has to be a win-win situation for both. It can't be that there is a win only for one partner and there is no win for the other partner. So unless we align on these pillars, we will not have the benefit. And let me give you examples of that, how it can work. Because you can have the collaboration at different level. You can have collaboration between OEMs. You can have collaboration between the OEMs and their suppliers. You can have the collaboration even between the OEM and their customers. So at different level, it will play out in a different manner. A quick example of some of these things could be, in many times you will see the supply chain costs are high on transportation when you have only one-way load. So how do you collaborate for the reverse logistics to, optimize that thing? How do you work with your critical vendors or critical raw material suppliers, your distributors, your external service partner to gain those kind of traction? Cross leveraging of facilities, equipment, technical know-how, or the other things by which you can make the supply chain not only resilient but optimal also. And that is where I think an external entity like Mahindra Logistics, which is a 3PL company, can help a lot by bringing these people on a similar platform and leverage the across the industry kind of practices, best practices or benefits, etc. This is what we have seen, a shift or change which has started taking place.
Sure. Saurabh, you can quickly discuss with us basically how did the client questions change? What were they asking more about? Was it more about analytics? Was it more about technology? Was it more about people, processes?
No, sure. I think one thing I must say is that I think last couple of years have been extremely good for consulting business. The demand for consulting services has really shot up. And, in fact, last, I would say 18 months, I've been continuously hiring people and hiring experts in my team. I mean, that's on a different note. But to your question, Vinod, I think there are multiple aspects to what you're saying. I think there is one need, which was, again, more immediate at that point in time. And then, of course, subsequently, as, a lot of our, other, colleague panelists have mentioned, the focus is also on long-term initiatives, build a supply chain, which is future-proof. So the kind of questions, if I have to really put it like that, one was to say that, could I, have a supply chain which I can simulate? So, creating a digital twin, being able to simulate supply chain on a model, and then seeing that if there is any disruption that happens at any part of supply chain, whether it's your tier one supplier, maybe a global supplier sitting in China, for example, or, another supplier of a supplier, which is tier two, tier three, or there is a shipment, getting stuck, like, the Suez Canal issue we saw, or things like that, or any factory getting shut because of people issue and things like that. So how would my overall, service levels to my customers get impacted? My product availability in the market get impacted. So a lot of work around creating the digital twins, both really trying to enhance the resilience, creating mitigation plans, and doing something like that. So that was one very, very big ask that came in from a lot of our customers. Second one was, they all expected consultants to bring an integrated approach. When I say integrated approach, no more pure play consulting, that, like, as we say, give fancy presentations. It's not the ask anymore. In fact, I would say that has anyways changed for quite some time. But now integrated approach, it means is you bring in your experts, from a process design or a supply chain strategy design perspective, bring your technology experts, who understand AI, ML capabilities, blockchain experts, bring in experts and team members who understand the technology landscape, which is not just the big OEMs, but also the startup ecosystem. Because there's a lot of great startups in India right now, which I must vouch for, where they can really bring in those, their tools and technologies and platforms and really tackle any kind of issues, and they're flexible. I mean, they actually are very flexible. They're very cost effective. Bring in that integrated approach to a client and demonstrate. And it's like, show me, don't tell me, right? So it's like, run it and then, demonstrate it, not just, give me theoretical input, etc. So that's the other part. And the last bit, if I have to say, is an outcome-based approach. Clients are all asking that, be a part of the game, put your skin in the game, gain share, and outcome based. All work today that I do is all outcome based, where my gain is linked to my client's gain. So so those are some of the changes which have happened. Of course, there are many more, but in a nutshell, those are the big ones.
Very valid point. Skin in the game. Everyone's talking that. Ms. Lal, you have to leave. So just one last question before you leave for something very urgent, which I believe we have to go for. In terms of, sort of very interestingly mentioned about some of the, how the client brief has changed. How has the partnership, if any, you can share for Tata Motors with smaller companies, other companies which may be helping you? How is that integration? How is that partnership grown during this period?
Yeah, absolutely. It's happened on both sides. For example, on the supply side front, we got a far more visibility on our tier 2s and tier 3s. Because now in this pandemic period, one of the learning was that we knew very little comparatively with respect to tier 1, about tier 2s and tier 3s. And their pain actually was not allowing them to supply to tier 2 and tier 1 and things like that. So that is one thing which happened on how we shared on what we are doing in our business continuity plan, and how some of the things that we are doing reached across to them, how our people went across and helped them, also short-term benefits in terms of expertise, in some cases working capital and things like that. That was on one side. On the other side, like everybody said, one thing that happened during pandemic is that all of us started buying digitally, right? Most of our purchases were online. And if these purchases were being made online, the e-commerce guys who bought goods to you, in any case, they needed different kind of trucks, right? And their requirements were different. For example, they did not want a huge truck which can load 75 tons. They wanted to do 20 tons, but they wanted guaranteed uptime. They wanted to travel goods from one place, point A to point B, in a specific period of time. So we kind of went into delivering those kind of vehicles, also assuring uptime, giving support, so that those e-commerce guys, their supply lines kept on running, and you used to continue to get your material, whatever you ordered, whether it was vegetable, medicine, or whatever it was, came on time to you. So therefore, these collaborations really deepened during these crisis hours. And I think these are the things where we have become far more stronger, and it's going to, help us even going forward.
Okay. Thanks so much for being with us and taking out the time. And thank you indeed, despite your busy schedule, making it for this conversation. Thanks indeed, Mr. Lal.
Thank you. It is one of those odd days. I'm otherwise not such a busy person. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks so much for taking out the time for us.
Bye-bye.
Okay, just Vinod, before you step in with the next set of questions, I just like to remind that there are some questions which are coming in. So there are more questions that you can put in, and there are questions coming in. So just one question, because this is very specific to the furniture industry. So maybe toss this one for Piyush. And before we move on, Vinod, with your set of questions. And this one comes from Avdesh Kumar Pandey, and he says, in case of furniture industry, working capital block is higher, then how to rebuild the inventory model in such a dynamic situation? Piyush?
I believe that it's like the situation is dynamic for any e-commerce company. So inventory is definitely a challenge for most of the companies, and but this question is specific to furniture, where the working capital block is higher. So that is definitely true. But I guess if we look at both the angles, the working capital block and the margins and everything, the things pan out pretty much fine. And as such, talking about Pepperfry as a company, we are a marketplace, so we engage with our merchants so that they share the working capital block with us. It's not like, so it's basically creating that kind of collaboration with your partners so that the burden is not entirely coming up to you. It is being shared upon, and then the margins takes care of the rest of the things. So, but yeah, you can definitely manage your inventory better. You can keep lesser amount of inventory, although that is also a very difficult thing in situations like pandemic and all. But yeah, the inventory can be managed in different ways. But when it comes to working capital block, it pans out fine if you collaborate with the merchants, if you keep healthy levels of inventory.
Okay, Vinod.
One of the things that supply chain actually works on is basically defined, regulated, and standardized processes. But now we're living in a world where there could be a third wave, and then half India is not working. We have cities working, and some places are shut. So at this point of time, that you have to react fast and you have to be flexible, while the systems basically are very standardized and rigid. How do you balance these two things? If we can start with Gajanan, that would be great.
We have to stay very agile, right? And like Javed mentioned about surge capacity or this floating capacity, which you need to have in supply chain, building those buffers, not only at your tier 1 suppliers, looking at your tier 2, tier 3 suppliers, extending that support. Being a big organization, right? You always have that lever with your like manufacturer like onsemi's or semiconductor industry, right? So that leverage, I think you have to bring in. Plus, I think this business continuity plan, where like especially when it is in a global organization, it is easy to distribute your demand based on where the customers are and where your manufacturing is. If you are closer to customer, it's a preferable way, but you still have options if it is a multi-node kind of a manufacturing or multi-region manufacturing. So these are the things which are, I think, helping us. And the pandemic, I think, every year here in last 2 years has given us a good refresher on how to stay agile. And agility is not only for waiting for the things to happen, right? It's also making yourself ready. So when I talked about this digitization or data-driven decision, I think we try to forecast things or try to simulate the things, what can go wrong and how do we recover on those aspects. So we try to put those scenarios in and try to mitigate one by one.
Good. In terms of, one of the things that we see is the government has especially in this budget, we have seen an infrastructure push. There are a lot of trade corridors being built. And I think that will also help companies reorganize their supply chains and save costs and maximize reach. How big is an opportunity is that for companies to benefit from? Mr. Rathi, if you could come in, please.
So let's look at it from the the current scenario, the geopolitical scenario, and things like China plus one kind of strategy are definitely going to help countries like India. And obviously, there are more countries also which will get benefited. And this will certainly change the way the trade was happening between China and other countries. And you will see that that will also define the new trade routes which will open up. So, for example, if the companies are deciding that as a China plus one strategy, they would like to create facilities in India or in Vietnam or Cambodia and countries like that, then obviously there will be an all-round growth which will happen. You will have more manufacturing which will come to India. That will also create more job opportunities for the people, and it will also create more opportunities for supply chain players like us. Because then, the more the manufacturing activity, more the GDP increase, etc., it benefits everyone. We are also into the cross-border logistics, which is freight forwarding, etc. So we are already seeing that our dependence on China is gradually shifting, because now we find the new trade routes which are evolving, and we are moving, say, more from Far East to also other countries compared to earlier when we were doing majority China. Having said that, has this completely shifted or in a big way it has shifted? No. Thing is, it is in the formative stage. People are firming up their plans, etc., and they are trying to move. But as we see, either from budget or the announcement from various companies that they are going to set up shop in India, definitely it's a very, very big opportunity and a very big positive for India as a country.
Mute. Saurabh, I wanted to understand from you, in terms of this China plus one opportunity that is emerging, what should companies be watching out for, specific signals? While we hear names like Cambodia and Vietnam and some of the other ASEAN countries, how do these little signals be looked at in the bigger picture?
Absolutely. See, the way, again, we're looking at this for many of the clients is that, yes, surely, companies are looking to build on the China plus one strategy, especially, if you look at certain sectors like pharma, where the dependence on, for example, China was extremely high or continues to be extremely high for sourcing APIs and other such inputs. So a China plus one strategy is a good thing to talk about, but unfortunately, the challenge is also that the plus one isn't really available as well for certain scenarios and certain inputs that you would look for. At the same time, there is competition from some of these countries that you mentioned, ASEAN countries. Vietnam is one such great example. As much as, in India, we are trying hard, even via the PLI schemes, trying to incentivize manufacturing in a number of sectors, core electronics and automobile and many others. But it's not easy to really have some of those companies also move into India and set up a shop. Simple reason being that you need an ecosystem. Even, if you look at today mobile manufacturing that is happening in the country, it's not about just an assembly line. It's about the whole ecosystem play that needs to fall in place for any such manufacturing to thrive in a country like India. Of course, there are other issues around approvals, government, regulatory, labor availability, power, scale, cost of manufacturing, many of those aspects as well. I think to me, the point is that, yes, it's an opportunity, a ripe opportunity out there. There are those, I would say, options available or opportunities available depending on the sector that we're talking about. At the same time, there is a government push via the PLI scheme, where government is looking to incentivize manufacturing. Number three, I would say even the larger companies, the bigger companies who have their manufacturing facilities in a country like China, etc., they are also looking to diversify. So there is that, I would say, a very natural pull and a push, which is emanating. So which is all good news. But I think it will take time, in my view. There are investments flowing in. There are project plans on the table. Of course, some action we are already seeing in a few sectors. But I think these signals, I think, will ultimately culminate into something meaningful for India as a country and an economy at large. I think it's going to take time, and it's not easy. And there is enough and more competition even from those smaller economies that we talk about, whether it's Vietnam, Cambodia, and other countries. I think they're all also looking at this opportunity the same way as India is looking, and they're also all doing what it takes to attract that manufacturing and that share to their own economies and their own countries as well. So it's a competitive play. I think how will it pan out for India? I think we'll have to see. But I think all the focus and all the push, the government, I think the intention, the policies, I think it's all moving in the right direction as of now.
Gajanan, would you like to share, given the way the India business functions for several of the multinationals, is there some kind of a push internally, if you can share, where there is increased demand for products from India or India to become a sourcing hub of sorts, as part of the larger picture, that?
Yeah, definitely. So Ashutosh, if you look at India has been working towards a very favorable environment for business, right? And we continue to invest in India. If you look at our middle class is going up, if you look at our education, I think the penetration on the education side is going up. And we have a large working class, right, which is, I think, one of the largest in world. And that's the reason we think that India is going to grow very fast. And it's a potential, definitely a potential manufacturing hub, because our consumption will be significant to have our own supply chains in place. And I think if you look at the policies around it, like Make in India, or even the Smart Cities project, or even the PLI schemes which are coming in, those are definitely, I think, some enablers to drive towards that.
Okay, Vinod, why don't you ask the next question?
Sure. In terms of building resilience framework, every company has had to redo their resilience framework. Javed, if you can talk about basically what all went into the building these new frameworks, and how are these different from the earlier ones?
Yeah, so we had we have gone through a complete reevaluation of our supply chain to bring in more resilience. As some of the other panelists had also mentioned, we were focusing towards consolidation of suppliers, consolidation of factories, going to bigger factories, global factories that were supplying the whole world. And so all this was very efficient from a cost standpoint, but might not have been so efficient in terms of a resilience standpoint. So the way we have gone about taking a new look is looking at shorter supply chains, where we have factories close to our customers. So that is one aspect of things. Also looking at the power of two, where we have two factories producing critical ranges rather than having a total dependency on one factory. Earlier, our tendency was to give a huge business share to a supplier who was very, very cost competitive. Now we are looking at the share of business in a much more, with a different lens, like for not only applying the cost lens, but also applying the resilience lens. Then we are also looking at the capacities, not only at our places, but also at our supply places. So we want to have some surge capacity where we can recover faster, in case there is a disruption of a month or 2 weeks, 3 weeks, are back to normal, should be at a very much faster place. Then other times, we were working with aggregators who basically would consolidate the freight, and then they would basically ship the material wherever it's required to be done. Now we are working directly with the lines because those are the guys who have the equipment, who have the containers, who have the ships, rather than aggregators who are dependent on these guys, working directly with the shipping lines, the container guys, etc. So a lot of changes, And the other thing, these are structural changes, the way we think, but I also want to stress on the people part. Ours is a big organization, and there is a tendency to centralize things and keep decision making at a central level. But I think what needs to happen is the reverse of this. We need to empower our local teams because let's say I'm sitting in India, even though I'm responsible for the operations in Vietnam, I really don't know what is going on in Vietnam, Empowering the local team, trusting them, guiding them, mentoring them to do the right decision. This is very, very important for the supply chain to be resilient and also agile and adaptable. Is bringing empowerment down to the local team members and decentralizing this function as far as the day-to-day operational decision making is concerned.
Sure. So one of the things is basically that supply chain used to work in a silo, but this event has brought supply chain right into the middle of everything. So now almost every decision, so many people are involved. How is supply chain dealing with this new situation and the new attention and the new responsibility within the organization? Gajanan, and then we can have Saurav and also Piyush come in. So
I think so. There is a good saying in supply chain which goes along, right? You can earn a customer first time, but if you want to retain a customer, you really need to have a strong supply chain in place. So I think we are seeing that, and the part of the strategy to retain the customer is making sure that the challenges are visible to our customers also, and we give them a right promise, right? So that they are not expecting something else, which will eventually create a bullwhip effect in the whole supply chain. So we are trying to balance it out with our partners in the supply chain, like on the supplier side, but we are also being transparent to our customers during these difficult times, I think, or challenging times.
Sure. Piyush?
Yeah, so very rightly said. So I believe it's true for all the organizations that supply chain has come at the center, and everyone is talking about supply chain. It's no more working in silo. So I guess it was long due. Supply chain is getting the attention which it deserves, truly deserves. One thing which I would like to point out, that it's not only the office people who have got the attention, it's the shop floor people also who have got a lot of attention during this time. So all the support, all the importance of these people, the kind of work they do be it the operators in the warehouses, be it the transport guys. So focus has come to them, how we can build trust with them. So all the vaccination support, all the insurance support that has come in for these guys, and that is quite good. And I think it's going to continue. So that's very good for the supply chain and for the organization.
Okay, I think Vinod also wanted Saurabh to take that question. So Saurabh, would you like to add to that before we go to Mr. Rathi?
Yeah, no, surely, Ashutosh. I think, in my view, and again coming in from the experience from the variety of clients that I work with, I think the focus has shifted to the fact that supply chain is. I'm not the only company, or I'm not the only one responsible for our supply chain. As much as we're talking about functional and departmental silos, I think it's also organizational silos to say that, I have my suppliers, I have my partners on the logistics and the downstream side. How do I really, collaborate more and more with them? How does that? I think a lot of comments got made earlier. I think, how do I share information with them so that they also can help me, realize and make an impact to the customer in terms of service levels, optimize costs and things like that. So I think one thing that definitely which has changed is absolutely supply chain is now at the middle of everything, center of everything. Earlier it used to be sales and marketing, but I would say supply chain is equally at par, if not more, for most of the organizations. And number two, the collaboration in terms of an extended ecosystem, not just my own organization with my suppliers, tier one, tier twos on the planning side, similarly on inbound logistics, strategic sourcing, how do I collaborate with my suppliers in a more strategic manner, not just, like a very tactical buying only. And similarly, downstream supply chain, logistics flows, working with 3PLs, partners, again, a much enhanced focus on collaborating with everyone. I think to me, that's a very, very big positive change, which is evolving.
Ms. Rathi, in terms of, the reverse part to you, because the changes that you're seeing in companies and the way they're looking to collaborate, you spoke about how they want companies like Mahindra Logistics as partners and, the way, the value it brings out. Can you share that experience, please?
Yeah, such very relevant question. And, this is what I was speaking earlier also. A close relationship between the customer and the supply chain partner can create effective use of combined resources. And a great example is an integrated supply chain collaboration, which we did with one of the consumer durable company last year, where we not only looked at optimization of their current network footprint and remodeling that entire thing, but looking at the increasing overall efficiency of their logistics operation by, of course, reducing the cost, etc. But at the same time, standardization of practices, KPIs across all locations, deployment of best-in-class digital tools, which is again, something which came from them, something which we brought on the table, etc. So whole idea was to create a strategic partnership to simplify logistics based on, again, trust and mutual goals. And let me tell you, one of the very unique thing or a very unique partnership which got developed in this is I get paid only when they sell their product finally. So while I do a pre-primary, a primary, a warehousing, everything for them, but I also get paid only when they sell the end product to their distributor. Now that's something very, very different. This is what you didn't see earlier. 10 years back or 5 years back, also these kind of things were not happening. While we talked about the value added services and then value based pricing, etc. But this is taking to a different plane. This is taking to a different level. I am as much keen to sell their products as much they are keen. So I will also, work overtime to make sure that the inventory moves, the planning happens in the right manner, the trucks reach in time, etc. So this is taking to the supply chain at a different plane. Absolutely. And this is something very, very unique about this particular deal.
Sure. So, Mr. Rathi, I'll start with you for this question, and I want all of the panelists to come in. This is something which requires a lot of experience and a lot of different thoughts. Every industry in this pandemic has gone through some temporary changes and gone through some permanent changes. According to your supply chain experience, you've had experience over decades. What will be the temporary changes and what will be the permanent changes? If we can start with you, then we can have all other panelists come in. Sir.
Yeah, so I think the permanent changes would be in terms of the way people were thinking of their supply chain, whether it was global or this thing, but they will have to completely remodel and reorient themselves, looking at that these kind of scenarios can also happen. Maybe earlier they never thought that these kind of disruptions can come, etc. So that is the first thing which will happen. Second thing which will happen is they will have to connect and look at the whole supply chain rather than only in a piecemeal basis. You can't say that I will try and optimize my transportation, but on the other hand, it may create some inventory at your warehouse, etc., etc. So you'll have to look at the supply chain in a holistic manner. This is one definite change on a permanent basis which will happen. People will start now talking about overall network, overall supply chain, rather than only trying to optimize individual pieces, etc. Third thing is it will accelerate the digital. My very strong feeling is that the digital adoption will increase over a period of time, and this is again going to be a permanent change. In short term, of course, I mean, every company has adjusted to the requirement at that point of time, and then they have tried to manage multiple things, including the safety of their own employees, making sure that during the lockdowns, etc., also, whenever allowed, how do they work and function. So all those were like a temporary adjustment to the reality at that point of time. But this pandemic, of course, will make these 3-4 changes which will happen. And one suggestion from my side would be, which I think people will start thinking about it, but how to make your cost more and more variable. So while Piyush talked about that he owns the assets, he owns his trucks, he owns his own warehouse, but I personally believe that's a wrong strategy. It may pay off in the short term, but in long term you have to make your cost more and more variable, and involve your partners also to share those risks and rewards also if possible, because then only your supply chain will be more resilient and you will be benefited over a period of time. Not again, I'm not talking about a short-term approach.
Sure. Piyush?
So to answer just that part of it, so Mr. Rathi, so that was something which rewarded us in that scenario. So it is definitely not something which I'm saying is the best strategy for the future. But yeah, that was something which helped us in the COVID scenario. As you truly said, that it has to be a collaborative approach. We have to work with the partners, and everything, the risk, the cost, the profit, everything need to be shared with the partners. Now coming back to the question that something which was temporary and something which are permanent changes. So I think in terms of one temporary change which I saw and realized was that the product range was very thin. The companies shifted to rationalization, the SKUs were cut short and all. So if we are having 200 SKUs, pre-COVID, the SKU range was cut short to 20, 24 SKUs, and then it was getting supplied. But I think that was a temporary change. It's not to continue because the focus is definitely customer. So in terms of permanent changes, apart from what Mr. Rathi said, I think getting closer to customer, servicing the customer better is something which is going to be a permanent change. And e-commerce as a sector will evolve. It has already evolved a lot. So earlier it used to be kind of a luxury or a niche segment was ordering for e-commerce. Now, due to the pandemic and all, this has accelerated the growth of e-commerce in many senses, and more customers are ordering from e-commerce. So that is something which is going to be a permanent change when it comes to managing the supply chain or from where the demand is flowing.
Javed, what do you think are going to be the permanent changes and what will be the temporary blips?
I think all the trends that you're seeing are going to be permanent. So I will go through them one by one. As Mr. Rathi said, the end-to-end orchestration of the supply chain, that is definitely going to be a permanent change. Resilience, rather than just chasing efficiencies and costs, is definitely going to be a permanent change. I mean, if you're talking about digitization, making the supply chain more intelligent, more autonomous, definitely, I think, especially for global companies, is definitely a permanent change. I mean, the way we work, I mean, new ways of working, like working from home, working remotely, connecting across the globe. All these things I think are permanent. I mean, these are going to be a permanent change. Sustainability, going for shorter supply chains, how you better serve the customer, not only from a cost perspective, but throughout the value chain. Agility, quick response to their changes, customization, a customized service is definitely going to be a permanent change. And then also cost management, so it's going to be a complete optimization of all these things rather than just relying on efficiency and cost. So I think these changes are here to stay, and analytics, data, autonomous, RPAs, machine learning, I mean, they're going to be more and more accelerated as we go forward.
Okay, so the broader trends pretty much are in sync, and the smaller ones looks like could be in place as well. Gajanan, would you like to add anything to that, permanent and temporary?
I think on temporary side, I'll say this prioritization thing is there, right? You are trying to prioritize whether your supplier is prioritizing you or you are prioritizing your customer. So that's a temporary phenomenon. And I think on the permanent side, it's only going to, I think the digitization speed is only going to increase. The robotics or automation is only going to increase, so that we have that resiliency in the supply chain to respond back faster if there is a setback.
Sure. Okay, we will nearly run out of time. So, Ms. Rathi, enough time for you for closing remarks. If you could spend a couple of minutes on that, please.
Sure. So we heard from the different panelists that increasingly complex geopolitical scenarios and the effect of pandemic have shown that the supply chains disruption and changing consumer behaviors require radical remodeling of how we manage the business. I think there was a consensus around that for sure. And when you look at the supply chains, we face a complex set of risks that must be addressed holistically. And again, I think a lot of panelists talked about that we must look in a holistic manner rather than on a piecemeal basis. And this has been an issue historically also, and maybe it got amplified more currently because of the US trade war, the pandemic, or even India-China border issues, etc., and that created those disturbances. And to achieve cost saving, a lot of businesses have been opting to go leaner in their supply chain, etc., and just making sure that they have enough inventory for production to meet demand. But by minimizing stock level, the time between sourcing material, etc., also created its own set of challenges, where people felt that the situation has become where the lines are stopping or the productions are not happening, or maybe they have to then bring the material at a much higher cost. So those are the kind of scenarios which happened. So while earlier the companies were comfortable with the lower inventory level, etc., but now we are seeing the increasing tendency to stockpile in order to weather the longer term disruptions, etc. And this strategy gives companies some room to scale up production, but we have to find a sweet spot where there is a mix of both rather than coming one extreme to the other extreme. So these kind of supply chain disruptions are actually pushing OEMs and suppliers to forge now new partnerships to make sure that the resilience in supply chain can be achieved. And then different vulnerabilities at every point of supply chain mean there is no single catch-all risk management solution, and we have to find different mechanism, means, etc., where the businesses can build more resilient supply chain by considering overall risk, rather than again saying that, okay, this pandemic is one risk, or China border issues is another risk, etc. And this is where I think players like Mahindra Logistics can play a very vital role in taking a holistic overall approach, and could work together to bring all stakeholders on same platform to bridge gaps in the whole supply chain. And technology can only enable and drive the future of supply chain, whether it is planning, visibility, automation, etc., and will give it the momentum. So with that, I would like to thank all the panelists, Ashutosh, you, Vinod, everyone, for conducting such a beautiful session.
Thank you so much, Ms. Rathi. And then, of course, one point I thought we referred to in passing was about the people. While the technology challenge is there, it's about the people. And, while I mentioned that, I must again remind, while Vinod sits in fantastic Shimla and enjoys some of the snowfall, getting to the people is also the challenge. Finding the right people also, Vinod, is a challenge.
Ashu, it's -2 and I've been freezing here because there's no light. There's nothing fantastic about it.
That makes the job of supply chain professional even more challenging to reach to the markets in those places.
We live in challenging times. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Thanks, Vinod, for helping me out today and being with us during this conversation. It's been fun speaking, and look forward to more such engaging discussions.
Thank you, Ashutosh. Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Thank
you.
you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks,
Bye.
Piyush. Thanks, Kajan, and thanks, Saurabh. Thanks, Sushil.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it. Thank you.